The latest State of Gender on JSE-listed boards report has been released and paints a mixed picture of the progress of women in South African listed companies. The 2022 report found that there has been a 39% improvement in gender diversity on JSE, that's Johannesburg Stock Exchange boards, over the last 5 years. The report was compiled from integrated annual reports for the reporting period of January 1st to December 31st, 2021. The report also found that women were making significant progress in gaining a majority of board positions. In 2021, women held 32% of board positions, while men held 68% on JSE-listed boards. This was a vast improvement from 2017, where women held only 23% of board positions and men held 77%. However, women remain largely underrepresented at executive level, with men still making up over 65% to 97% of various senior executive roles, according to the report. The report also found that many companies have not met their own gender parity goals. Joining me now from Cape Town is economist Phelisa Nkomo. She's back again, and we get straight into this conversation. Phelisa, welcome to the show once again. When we look at the report that has come out, I think part of it has to be a conversation around what accounts for women's underrepresentation on these boards, particularly in the 21st century. So take us through what you think is happening there.
It's actually a very important question, and thank you so much, and good afternoon to the listeners. And the key question that we actually need to understand about women's participation in general in the economy, right? It's linked to the issues around, firstly, the role of women in society. That's one. I think the second issue is the fact that women actually undertake or are expected to do unpaid social reproductive work, right? Which is work for free. But also the other issue is that there's a lot of exclusion of women, right? The fourth one, in the context of South Africa specifically, actually has been what we call harmful exclusion of women. And I'll explain what that means. Is that in South Africa we have such beautiful policies, but in fact women still continue to experience precarious positions or precarious conditions in terms of work, but as well as structural exclusion in participating in critical leadership positions, including the issue around gender wage gap. So there are a plethora of reasons why, but at the heart of it is the fact that patriarchal system is so embedded into the structure of the economy, and as such, women experience the exclusion. Mm-hmm. The other issue I must actually raise is actually because there's a direct link between women running vibrant businesses, right, and their participation in boards. So, and the fact that women actually are struggling in terms of participating, of running vibrant businesses, it means that they're not getting noticed and they're not able to participate in boards and decision making. I mean, while these numbers, for example, are quite interesting, but I do think that if you are in the country, if you are in a country where women constitute 51% of the population, it's still a shame to have only 32% of women who participate in board. Even in that context, there are geographic issues, by the way, that more often than not, women who get to participate in boards are likely to be women who actually stay in Johannesburg or in Gauteng, right? But women who be staying in other provinces are not likely even to be noticed and are not likely to participate in this position of power.
Interestingly, you also then point out a physical sort of barrier as well in this conversation. So one thing that the report did note is that as women are mostly underrepresented in board chair and executive director levels, it might seem that that's not necessarily the case lower down the ladder. So let's look at that. Is the same thing happening at the lower rungs of the corporate ladder when it comes to the lower levels of business? Is it any better when it comes to gender parity?
Well, that's interesting, by the way. We have a policy in South Africa, which is Black Economic Empowerment, which is an affirmative policy, which amongst those really seeks to facilitate and address the racial exclusion and racial discrimination that Black people had experienced during the apartheid, including gender exclusion, right? So, and there are several categories within that Black economic empowerment. Amongst those is participation in management, is ownership, is contribution in corporate social responsibility. It's also, employment numbers. Now, two things, and I just want you to follow my thought process. In addition to this, there's something called Employment Equity Act, which firms are actually meant to actually follow from an employment perspective. And the research now that we've seen, particularly for 2020 and 21, in fact, 2019, 2021, 2020, for the last 3 years, right, is that in fact, actually the numbers have reduced from a leadership perspective. And as such, companies are even budgeting the penalties that they're supposed to be, the penalties for not meeting this policy objective or policy requirement. Now, let me come back to your question around participation at lower levels. It's true, for instance, that you do get a lot of, Black women and young women who get to participate in the lower levels and sometimes even the middle management. But there's a practice in the South African labor market, which is starting to come out, fairly clear, is that there is a practice of underemployment of young Black people in particular. And the underemployment in economics, it's where people are actually they are misplaced in terms of what they studied and qualified for at school, and as well as what they are working. So you can walk into a company and find a young woman saying, "Oh no, I'm a scientist. I've done, biology, at university," but they're doing the reception work in a tourism company, right? And you're starting, so that's called underemployment, right? And sometimes you may think that, young people are actually employed and it means that when younger people don't use that skill, they tend to lose it. So what is the ripple effect of those? Is that the indication is that, so as those younger people start losing the knowledge that they've learned, etc. Amongst the key things is that they're not likely to grow up and become specialists in the areas they've learned, but all of a sudden they actually have to learn new things because they're looking for income to survive. Now, that's the nature of labor market in South Africa. And we've not been able to interrogate this, specifically where there's a misplaced, people actually being misplaced in positions and careers that they've not studied for. And the implication for economic progress and social progress. Because the implications of people being placed in areas where they didn't study, it means that firstly they get to learn less. They get to earn lesser than what they've studied because the employer would have to teach them new skills that is not associated with what they've learned at school. And by the way, it is something that we're seeing a lot in labor markets across Africa. And part of it is the fact that the industrialization agenda in Africa has really been delayed, and there's been, instead we've seen an imports. And when countries import a lot, amongst the key issues, it does get reflected on the leadership, economic progress, social progress, and the resilience of the economy, and ultimately into the GDP output. And I know that you may think that these issues aren't not linked. They are so linked because you must always look at what it's called, what are the outputs of the social outcomes into the economy, and how that then gets to facilitate citizens to grow and have access to opportunities much earlier in their lives. Okay. So, and just to wrap up the question, is that the key issue here is that young people are working, but there are a number of them that are misplaced in terms of their own careers.
Okay, and when you look at that mismanagement or this mismatch of job roles and even abilities, it further then goes down the line to make it more difficult, particularly for women, to find themselves in leadership or executive roles. So you talked about the policy in South Africa and making it almost of an affirmative action situation. And the report also noted that a number of these companies have their own stated gender parity goals, but have failed to meet their own goals. Do we now have to look at a point in time where it's time to penalize? It's time to make it a sort of rand and cents sort of conversation where there's some kind of penalty, some kind of financial incentive or financial penalty for not meeting these goals year on year so that we can balance the numbers. What do you think?
I think that, yes, there are several approaches that you need to undertake. Already in the market, there are incentives, by the way. Part of the incentive is that if you meet these goals, amongst those, there's something called Black Economic Empowerment Certificate. Actually, you get into different levels. So the higher the presence of women, Black people, people with living with disability, rural people working with rural communities, the higher the number, the more of your BE points. So that's an incentive on its own. And those BE points that you get actually allows a lot of businesses to be able to earn opportunities in terms of public procurement. So that's the first issue. I do think that the other issue, there must be a concerted and very deliberate, designed program to support women. And I know the question is always going to be like, women are highly educated, and what's an issue? One of the key things, as long as women are expected to play these multiple roles in society, amongst those which I reflected on was the unpaid social reproductive work, right? Which is so unpaid social reproductive might seem to be such a fancy word, but really is that women are expected to bear children. Women are meant to be emotionally involved and raise children. Women are supposed to be cooking at home. They must oversee the cleaning where they are able to hire a helper at home. But if they're not able to hire, they must be able to do that. They must be available for emotional support of extended family members in cases where they're married, even if they're not. But women have to be available for everyone, with a big heart for everyone within the family. So in essence, it's true that if already society, if women play that role of holding society together, right, in as far as providing that emotional support, taking that call, providing food for this one and supporting and be present. And at the same time, they're expected to be perfect in terms of running businesses. And there are no systems to facilitate and support them. Because, and I think the key question is always, why would you then have, in such an industrialized country, you have 32% of women in boards, and then you have 72 women in boards, besides the other stereotypes that I've already highlighted to. But there's a bigger question that we need to look at and say, actually, we need to shift in making sure that men do play a critical role in the social reproductive components of life in society. Looking after the children, they need to experience and actually understand how raising children after looking at children actually contributes into sometimes delaying your career. But not only that, in that you embed that social consciousness within the business community, that in essence, when people are playing such a role in society, it means that the private sector needs to provide support for those people to be able to remain effective. And as long as we don't shine a true spotlight in terms of the role of women in society and the role they play in business, we always separate these two lives as though women are two different people, whom in fact they actually support exactly the very same system. They make it sure that they clean the houses. So when men are walking back from home, they come back into a clean house. Who has done that, right? But at the same time, you're expected to be in the board meeting, but someone else who's a man didn't have to manage or even clean the house, but in fact, is kind of like, is a prim and proper, sitting in the boardroom ready, have been able to read the board pack overnight because they didn't have to look after the child overnight. And I do think that for me, the value of these reports actually, it grants us an opportunity to shine a spotlight in the aspect of our lives. And by the way, the title of this report saying short supply, women are not short supply, women are available. It's just that the system is not able to create not only opportunities, but also to train and support women to be able to. Because we also know that, by the way, business environment has such an embedded masculine culture, masculine competitive culture, and sometimes could be very toxic, by the way. And I do think that women need to be embraced to bring in who they are in the boardroom, the leadership qualities, because women actually have a lot of good leadership qualities. We won't be able to raise kids if we don't have good qualities. And unfortunately, the business community is not ready to actually accept some of those qualities that women bring into the business. So I hope that even in Africa, we're going to start compiling this type of reports and tracing women exactly where they are and saying and shining a spotlight and say, what are the reasons why women, for instance, women will be sharing a boardroom. They're getting an SMS saying that the child at school has fallen off the stairs and they have to still, sit through the meeting while they're chairing the meeting, etc. And if a woman would say, please pause, can I please take this call for my school child? And she would be, interpreted as a weak person.
Okay, so Phelisa, I want to, let me come in here because you started talking about the qualities that women bring, and I want that to be the final question in this conversation, because some will say, at the end of the day, what's the point? The point is that companies should have leadership and then should be making a profit and continue to be able to employ people and do the work they do. So why should we be worried about the gender of the person who's sitting in the executive position or who's sitting on the board? So that's our final point in this conversation. Why does it matter? And I know it seems that sometimes we have to tie these things to money for it to make sense to some people. So as you answer the why does it matter conversation there, for there to be diversity, gender diversity on boards, let's also look at it in terms of a financial business case. Does it make rands and cents? Does it make naira and kobo? Does it make shillings and cents and even dollars and cents to have more women on the boards of companies? And not just, it's easy to look at the Johannesburg Stock Exchange listed companies, but overall, having more women at the table. Let's do this briefly.
This is one of the best questions. Firstly, women provide diverse leadership expertise, because remember, women raise diverse children, right? So women naturally know what we call diversity and inclusion, because they raise diverse children and they have to make it sure that they treat their children equally. That's the first issue. The second issue is that the leadership of women that women bring in is the leadership of nurturing and knowing that they build businesses in a much more comprehensive way. They're never linear, they're quite comprehensive, because that's an approach already they apply from a home. The other issue is that women consistently are connected to their own intuition, and as a result, it means that more often they connect between intuition and the headspace. So there's a congruence in decision making in terms of women. The third issue is that women, by the way, are quite futuristic, right? The fifth issue is that women are able to quickly resolve a crisis. They are quite good, for example, in using what we call alternative dispute mechanism in resolving any conflicts, which in fact are always embedded in running the business, right? And women actually always try and avoid open wars and toxic environment, and they're always seeking peace. And you will never be able to run, a resilient business, nor an economy where there's an instability. But when women rise into position of power, you'll always experience stability, because women actually don't like wars. They like peace. So it's the same principle. So there's a very strong business case to make it sure that you include women in boards, in executive position, and even designing leadership programs to allow women to actually to grow up as part of a program to make it sure that there's their second layer leadership within the company.
All right, Phelisa, thank you so much. I see that this is definitely a conversation you're very passionate about. And as we look to expand and having these conversations around the societal structures that make it also difficult for women in business, we'll be touching base with you as well. Thank you so much, and do enjoy your weekend.
Thank you so much.